Hi everyone, it's Terry here from nutsaboutsstamping.com. In today's video, I'm going to teach you a really fun and quite new technique. And I'm going to use this technique to create a masculine birthday card using the Perennial Birthday stamp set. The technique is called Scrappy Strips technique. I did not invent it. It was invented by another Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and he actually used a painting in his living room to give him this inspiration. So it's really quite fun. So what you want to do is you want to collect some scrap pieces of, you can use either designer series paper or you can use solid colors. In the original technique that this demonstrator created, he used solids, but I have a lot of designer series paper left over and I want to use it up before it retires so that I have space for new designer series paper that's coming out in the next annual catalog. I've already seen the next annual catalog and I'm in big trouble when it comes to designer series paper. So I have a layer. So this technique happens on a layer that you're going to put on a card base. I've chosen Night of Navy for my layer because it's one of the predominant colors in this designer series paper that I'm going to use. You also need a paper cutter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the beginning part of what you're going to do to create these strips. So what I started with was a piece of 6 by 6. You can use a bit smaller, but you want a piece that's large enough so that your strips are going to end up going over the width or the length, I guess, of your layer. Because when you create these strips, you want to have an overhang on the top and the bottom side. Let me show you so I can be a little bit more clear. So normally when you cut strips using our paper cutter, you line them up against the top bar, and that holds your paper in place so it doesn't slide. But for this technique, you're not going to do that. What you're going to do is actually angle your paper so that you create a strip, like a scrap strip, that gets narrower on one end and wider on the other. Now, you're just going to eyeball it. You're not going to, I'm not using any particular measurements, but what I have found playing with this technique just a little bit myself is you don't want your strips to be too wide because they'll take up a lot of space on your layer. And I found that this technique looks better when you have a bunch of narrower strips. So I'll just cut a second piece. Again, you're just eyeballing it, so your pieces aren't going to be perfect, and I think that's the beauty of this technique. So for each of my designer series papers, I'm going to cut about 4 strips. So let me show you using another pattern. Again, you're just going to eyeball it. So I've got this piece, and then I think I'll angle the opposite way. Okay, hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to angle it the other way again. Again, like I've said, I think the technique works better when you have narrower strips. Okay, so let me try another piece. And I'll show you in a second how you layer it all together on your layer, on your card base layer. Okay, and I'll stop at this point. I think you get the hang of what I'm trying to show you here. So then you're going to set your paper cutter aside just for a minute, though. You're going to bring it back in a second. And what I would recommend is you use your silicone sheet because there might be a bit of glue that gets beyond your layer, and that's not going to be so nice on your grid paper. So I'm going to use my multi-purpose glue. It's this Tombow liquid glue. I find it's great. And here's another tip for you. You want to make sure that your glue does not extend beyond your paper layer. Otherwise, you're going to get glue and a mess all over everything. So what I kind of do is just eyeball it. Again, this is not a technique for those of us that are really particular. And then you're going to just lay your strip down like so. Now there's a tiny little bit of the Night of Navy showing. So I wanted kind of like a border around. I'm not sure if I'll end up with a border in the end, but let me take another strip. And this time I'm going to lay it the other way. Let me show you. So first of all, I'm going to add some glue. Just a little line of glue. And then I'm going to turn my strip so it's the opposite. And what I've learned for this technique is what you want to do is try and lay your strips so that they are lined up vertically and they don't start to sort of tilt one way or the other. So you want to line up your strips along the entire piece. Let me try this one next. So I've got a piece of the glue or a strip of the glue. Now I'm going to turn mine the other way this time. And again, I'm going to try and keep it so that it's nice and straight vertically. Slipped a little bit. So you can determine how much of the layer color you want showing through. I think the beauty of this technique is you use what you have on hand. Coordinate your colors. You could do solids and patterns. There are so many ways that you can have fun with this technique. So let me stop at this point in time. I think you hopefully get the idea of you're going to continue layering your strips all along this layer, and then you end up with something that looks like this. So let me turn it over so you can see. I used the Night of Navy again as my base, and you can see I've got all of this overhang, which is what you want. That's why I said originally cut your strips to be longer than your base so that you can then trim it. So I'm going to bring back in my paper cutter. I'm going to turn it over, and what happened on mine was I did not lay mine very straight. So I'm going to actually trim first off. I'm going to trim all of these little strips like so. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to trim it again like so. And actually it worked out all right. I was going to trim it to be a bit smaller, but I think it's actually okay. So this is eventually going to be attached to a card base. But I think the next thing I want to do is create a phrase. And I've already said I'm using the Perennial Birthday stamp set. So what I've got is a strip of Whisper White. I've got the Happy Birthday phrase. And I'm going to use Night of Navy because that's the main color for my card. So I'm going to make my phrase a corresponding color, or the same color, I guess. And I'm going to stamp the Happy Birthday, like so. And then I'm going to layer this onto a piece of Garden Green, because Garden Green is one of the other colors in the Designer Series paper. Okay. Now, again, you can, I never layer these on straight. Strips and I just don't get along very well. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to attach it to the front of my card base, or the card layer, sorry, the front of the card layer. Okay, like so. Hopefully you can see how this is all coming together. And then I'm going to add it to a card base of Whisper White. Isn't that cool? It's so fun. I think this is a lovely technique. I think the best part about being a demonstrator is that everybody shares their creativity and their innovative ideas with each other. So then we can turn around and share them with you. But it's really fun to learn from each other. Okay, so there we go. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I don't want a lot of embellishments on my card. I've decided that the paper is going to be what I want to shine through. But I have some leftover embellishments, and I thought it would be fun to use the green, and these dots have a real lovely sparkle to them, and that will complete my Scrappy Strip Scrappy Strip technique to create a masculine birthday card. I hope that you'll give this technique a try. Take some time, go back and review over and over again. I think, again, the key is to create strips that are longer than your layer and that are fairly narrow in the middle. So, and remember, when you put them on your cutter, you're going to angle it so that you end up with narrow pieces and sort of wider pieces as you go back and forth along this card. For a complete listing of the supplies that I used and the measurements for some of the layers, although these strips you're not going to have measurements for because you're going to create the width and the length that you want, head on over to my blog, www.nutsaboutstamping.com. And while you're on my blog, consider subscribing to my free newsletters. I send 2 newsletters a week, and you're going to have a sample in each newsletter that you won't see anywhere else. I also have a link over on my blog to my online store in case you'd like to buy some of the products I use to make this card. I'm Terry. I am Nuts About Stamping. I hope you'll try this fun technique someday soon. Bye for now.